Britain tried to give Caribbean colonies independence as a single nation. Let's get rid of all these colonies together. Let's create something called the West Indies Federation. Okay, now you're independent. The federation didn't last because Jamaica is the largest country among the English-speaking Caribbean. Somehow they weren't chosen to be the headquarters. They wanted to be the headquarters. So the politics of the federation just caused the whole thing to break up. And Trinidad was the capital, and people were trying to migrate to Trinidad. So that is my starting point. The rural to urban migration. Here are these islands that are part of the same country. Go to the city, young man, head to Trinidad. So around the end of the 20th century, I did a lot of research on Trinidad and Tobago because it's an interesting cosmopolitan idea. Half of the population is of Indian extract because at the end of slavery, the governor said, we need people to work in the agricultural sector. So he wrote to the King of England and said, is it possible we could import labor from India? I mean, way out there, another part of the British Empire. So they imported labor from China and India. The agreement was 7 years. Come across the Atlantic at some point, and for 7 years work in Trinidad, and either we'll give you land to stay, or we'll pay your passage to go back to India. What you will see as you look at these data, hopefully there'll be some learning in the process. Of those who were working, the immigrants are older, which means that less immigration was taking place over time, either meaning that the country was not doing so well, or they were blocking people from coming in. Once you got in, you could stay, but if you were trying to get in, it was harder to get into the country. And only 5% of the workforce was immigrant. So that's a small number. I'm just trying to hit the high notes here. So the average immigrant had 9 years of schooling. The average native worker in the working population had 10 years of schooling. This should not surprise you. Since the average immigrant is older, when there was less schooling available, once they get to age 17 or 18, the schooling is over for most of them. It would make sense that years later, you're keeping people in school. So the first number should not surprise you. It is not that the immigrants who are going there are less educated than the natives. It's that the in-migration stopped. And perhaps they were even ahead of them. In other words, the people who were coming were people who had more education than the average Trinidadian. It's possible. You can't look at the numbers and come to a conclusion. It's like looking at your grandparents' generation with less schooling, comparing to yourself, and saying, well, they didn't have, they were less educated. Well, compared to people in their cohort, maybe they were not. But here's the thing that surprised me. Among these older workers who were of immigrant extract, a greater percentage had college education. There's something called formal training. So the questionnaire asks you, have you had formal training? It's a yes, no. And this says that 63% of the immigrants said yes, they had some formal training, not education, formal training. So you go to an institute, take some courses or whatever the case might be, or you get sent to another country for training. Then there's this category called on-the-job training. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but equal percentages had on-the-job training, and 2/3 of the population said they had formal training beyond their education. I think that's the high notes there. I'm going to go to the second table. And this is the kind of statistical analysis that economics undergraduates will do before they graduate. But the number that I've chosen to highlight is what I want you to focus on. We were talking about returns to education, and I said there are various definitions. I was playing with a definition, which was the premium that you're going to make between high school and college, and saying that number over the stock of costs. There are different ways to calculate that. In the analysis I'm doing here, it doesn't even involve the cost at all. It's just saying how much higher is your salary for another year of schooling. What does 1 year of schooling do to increase your salary? So what this says is that the extra year of schooling that immigrant got give a 9% bump in salary. But for a native person, that extra year of schooling only gave a 5% bump in salary. The constant term kind of puts the base, okay? And the base is almost the same. But I want to fixate on that, and then I'll go back to the regular part of the course, I think. So what do we see there? That immigrants get a greater bump from an extra year of schooling than natives do. The economics student tries to figure out, why is it that the immigrant is getting a better return on their education than the native? Because generally what you would think is that the labor market would penalize the immigrant. So what we try to do is to rationalize. And you know the word rationalize is two words, right? Rational, lies. By specifying a linear function, this is saying for the immigrant, the slope is a 9% rise per year. And that surprises me because I would expect it to be the other way around. You penalize the immigrant, hey, why are you here? Because it doesn't make sense that the immigrant should get a much higher rate of return to an extra year of schooling. I suspect this group was probably CEOs of multinational companies or something like that. People who were so high on the income scale, but they were not natives. And as a result, that number was high. We can't do that except by getting the raw data and see. Now, if their schooling was at Oxford and Harvard and places like that, it makes sense. As opposed to local schools. Oh yeah, you are educated in the best parts of the world, which means that these immigrants then are formal sector immigrants and not informal sector immigrants. The informal sector immigrants obviously will be down here. And maybe it's possible, who knows? I haven't thought about this before. And it's possible that for the immigrants, it looks like that. And for the natives, it looks like that. Native, immigrant. And I should have color coded this appropriately. So that for the lower, I don't want to say class, the less educated immigrants, really the wages are low. And for the higher educated immigrants, the wages are higher. So the steepness of the slope, the average might be the same, but the range for the immigrants might be much greater. Very, very low salaries for those who are unskilled, and very, very high salaries for those who are super educated. That's my suspicion right now, that this is steep because these wages are very low and these wages are very high. And when you average them over the years of schooling, you get that steeper incline. That's my guess. The range for the natives is smaller because you might have a situation where they say, okay, here's the minimum wage you're going to pay a native. And the rate of increase is slower, whereas the rate of increase is greater because an informal sector immigrant who comes into your country might have very few means to make a decent living. There's no good opportunities. And then there's some who migrate and get great opportunities. So normally, the expectations is averaging not so great opportunities with fantastic opportunities. That's what draws you in. It happens occasionally. You hit the lottery. You figure, hey, life works out. So for some people, it works. For those people at the top, it's working. The migration has worked. But that's not average. That's outlier. That happens. So what I included, because the data weren't the greatest data, I included marital status. And the numbers in parentheses are p-values. I'm looking for 2 as the first number. 95% confident that the coefficient is not 0. So the larger is the p-value, the more confident we are that the coefficient is not 0. But most people treat the point estimate as sacrosanct. It's telling you a story. So even the 8.8% might not be true. I'm just very confident it's not 0 in both cases. Anyway, so assuming we're saying that there's a 17% premium to being married. I want you to think about that. And for natives, it's a 25% premium. So why would married people earn better than single people? What that says is that the people who are married get a bump in salary that their twins, identical in every respect, who are single don't get. Then we try to rationalize why that may or may not be the case. It could be, I'm going to pay you more because you signal, I think that's key, signal. You signal that you're available. I might never actually call on you, but you signal that you're available. That used to be a strong signal for men. Men who were married signaled that they were probably going to be more committed to the job. Sometimes it's discrimination, but most of the research around the world shows it's called the marriage premium. Look it up, marriage premium, that married people earn more because of the signal they're sending of stability, commitment to the job, etc. But for women, it could backfire. And here's the premium for being male. So you and your your twin sister, same education, everything is equal. The male will have a premium. That's known. that even after you control for various things, again, the bias. So in the employer's mind, the employer is the one paying the wage. The female is more likely to leave the market. We talked about that for family formation reasons. So the employer will say, okay, and it used to be discrimination. Well, he has to support a family, so I'm going to pay him more. Her money is pin money. Supporting the family, she's not carrying the weight of the family. Hers is like extra income for the family. It is shown around the world that once a field becomes feminized, the majority of the employees in that job category are female, the rate of increasing the salary is slower. I'm not making this up. I'm the messenger, but I'm not making this up. Because women do not fight as aggressively for salary increases as men. And the more traditional the society, the wider is that gap. So in Russia, where the majority of doctors are females, the rate of increase of doctors' salaries in Russia is slow. Because women do not position as aggressively for salary increases as men do. And there might be other cultural dimensions to that I can't bring in or not worthy of bringing in right now. But one of the things that surprised me, because I was pondering all of the time, is that you answer the question, did you get training? Yes, I got training. You expect the people who are trained to get a bump for the training. And I don't know, again, it could be muddy data, it could be a number of things. The natives who reported they had training, not a bump. Formal training, you went to a formal institute, 15% bump. On the job training of 5%. But the immigrants didn't get the premium for training. That surprised me. There's no way to explain that. It could be that they had training and the education, and that bump in education that I saw could be commingling of the training and the education. It could be. On the other hand, it could be that among those who are at the bottom, the training isn't helping. So you report you got training, but you don't have a job that uses the training. Or the training was a short period of training. The question is a yes, no question. Did you get on-the-job training or did you get formal training? They didn't ask how long was the training. So the number is hard to explain. It's surprising. And you expect that to improve your income rather than work against you. Another problem could be sample size. The sample is so small that the data get muddied and I need more data to turn that negative to a positive. But right now, it's not positive and significant. The training doesn't seem to help. Household head. I think I'm trying to convince you that there are things that you would learn in American neoclassical economics that might not apply elsewhere because there's still more tradition and culture embodied in how things get done. So should you get a premium for reporting yourself as head of household? Again, it's a commitment thing. You're head of household, you're going to commit more to the labor market. So the premium you see for head of household might make sense. And that's across the board. You want to see them across the board, both for natives and for immigrants, to say that the labor market is not as interested in whether you're an immigrant or native, whether you came into that culture or you were born there, it's not interested in that. It's saying, okay, head of household, yeah. Hopefully it's not discrimination. That's the thing you always have to ask yourself. Is the employer discriminating by giving you more, or are you manifesting certain characteristics that cause the employer to pay you more? You show up, you're early, you dress nicely, you get a haircut, you play the part, you kiss up to the boss, you do whatever is necessary, you represent, so that the premium is actually based on your characteristics, not based on the employer being biased in your favor. And children, I don't know why I included that. One of the things that you'll expect is that if you have more children, you might be signaling as well. I don't know. Why is it negative? The more children you have, it's a penalty to your earnings. You need more flexibility. I can't go on that training to England because I got to take my kids to school. I got to do homework with them. So you are more committed to the family at the local level, and you don't have the options that the employer might want to send you for. In the gender dimension, the employer would ask that question: who do you send for the training, the male or the female? And you know the answer historically. The guy got the training because he was available 12 months a year. Whereas if the woman decided to have a child, she might be, see you later, bye-bye, or I need maternity leave. So the employer didn't feel as though he or she was getting all of the returns to that training every single day. If there's going to be a 3-month maternity leave here, next 2 years, another 3 months, or maybe every year. So the guessing in the employer's mind Made him say, if I'm going to gamble, spend $50,000 on a training program, send somebody to England or wherever to be trained. A greater return on investment if I send the male versus the female. Does that make sense? And again, just the messenger. I'm not endorsing or supporting. I'm just saying that when you play with data, these are some of the things that manifest themselves. One of the things that shows up in all of my research on Trinidad and Tobago is if you work in the government sector, you get a phenomenal premium. Because the government salaries are the formal sector jobs. And the problem, not the problem, the interesting thing about the civil service in many countries is you don't have to work very hard. But I've looked at the research around the world, and if you work in the government sector, you usually end up getting a premium. Now, smart, ambitious young people don't want to work for the government, but people with lower level skills view that as a status thing, happy to take it. Because they might not get the salary, even though it shows up as salary, but they get the flexibility and the security. And there's a lot to go with that makes you say, hey, this is attractive.